Hello, it's Anne Emery, and today I'm joined by Vivian Jefferson. Vivian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So Vivian and I are both members of the same Facebook group. It's an online community for people who are taking data visualization training with me. And a couple of weeks ago, Vivian posted and said something along the lines of, my graphs were just featured on a news story. And she had linked to the article and a video clip showing her graphs that she'd worked on. And the topic was all about school reopening plans. We'll tell you more about that. That's why Vivian's here today. And parents' ideas about that, and students and teachers' ideas. I was so glad when I saw this because the default, what typically happens is we collect all this data. We have surveys, we have assessments, we have interviews, we have focus groups. And then the data usually just kind of sits there in what I call the dusty shelf report. It's the Times New Roman size 12, double-spaced, 1-inch margin report that just goes on and on and on, where we typically, I think just because of the way we're all trained, we have way too much narrative, maybe way too many tables, not enough graphs, or the graphs that we do often produce, sometimes they're just too dense, or they have too many technical terms that the audiences that we want to read the graphs, it's just like so many stumbling blocks for them. So that's what I typically see. So anytime we see people like you doing things where you've got graphs that are actually readable, that are really intuitive, really clear, they get to the point, things that people can actually use to inform decisions, it's so exciting for me. So that's why I wanted to bring you on and talk to you more about the work that you did and how the work was shared. So first, Vivian, let's talk a little bit about you. So tell me about the work that you're currently doing. Where do you work? What's your role all about?
Sure. I work in the research office of Loudoun County Public Schools in Virginia. We're one of the largest school divisions in the state. We have about 83,000 students in 94 school facilities, so it's pretty big. The research office is very small. We have 4 people on our team. So we all do a lot of collaborating and sharing of our projects, but we each have a specialty. We have a program analyst who does program evaluations, a data analyst who handles a lot of the data extracts and technical things, and I manage surveys. And then we have a supervisor of the whole office. And then we all do ad hoc kind of data requests for data that come in. And it could be from principals in schools, could be from senior leadership, the school board, members of the public. And then we do some annual reports and reports throughout the year.
So for people who don't know, Loudoun County is one of the very big counties in the Washington, D.C. area. I went to Fairfax County Public Schools, and Loudoun is, I think, right next to it. Yeah, I think bordering. It's in the same area.
Yeah,
I remember,
just to the west.
Yeah, you've been there since, I was reading your LinkedIn profile, since 2005, right?
Yes.
So you've seen a lot of changes over the past 15 years, I bet.
Yes. Yeah, it's a growing school division. We open at least one new school a year. This coming year, we're really opening a high school. So ever since I've been there, it's been, I think maybe there was 1 year where we didn't open a new school, but yeah, we have 2,500 new students every year, I think.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like in the 90s and 2000s, Loudoun it was horse farms and vineyards. And while there's still plenty of open space, now it's known as this really thriving area that's attracting so many businesses and so many families. And I remember personally, we would lose our high school teachers because they'd want to go over to Loudoun, this new like amazing school system that was thriving. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but I know that I think very highly of Loudoun County Public Schools. So I know when I first met you and heard you were working there, it was like, oh, amazing. I want to learn more from Vivian about her work. Okay, so we are recording this, Vivian, in summer 2020. What's happened for you in the past couple months? How has your role shifted with COVID, if at all?
I think the data requests that we've gotten have been more urgent and more bigger as the leadership tries to make decisions pretty quickly about in the spring when the schools closed in early March. We were able to implement some online learning based with the tools that we already had. So the leadership wanted to monitor how that was going. Are students logging in? Are they engaged? And what we found is that the tools that we had didn't necessarily collect all of that data. We could tell how many were logging in and if they logged in, but not if they were doing the activities or how long they were in. But we were able to give people some of that. We've been doing more surveys to try to get where do people stand, what are their concerns. But also, I think it's had a bigger impact on what we haven't been able to do. Usually in the spring, we do assessments so we can see how students have grown in their learning over the course of the year. And we haven't been able to do that, so we don't know if the interventions we had in place worked. We don't know what the student needs are and strengths are going into the next school year. We've been doing a lot of work in the equity area, so we won't know. We won't have like the whole last quarter of data to be able to compare with previous years. There'll be anytime we see trend data for 2020, it's going to have that asterisk, like 3/4 worth of data. So, and I think that's probably happening all over with school systems across the country.
So you've been with Loudoun County, we said, 14, 15 years at this point. But I was reading your LinkedIn profile earlier today. I see that you also have a lot of writing experience and survey experience. So tell us briefly what you did before coming to the public school system.
I started out in the 80s working for an association and did manage surveys for them. I also did some writing there and answering requests that came in about managing associations. And then I did, when my kids were born, I went to do freelance work so I could be more flexible with my scheduling and my time. And so that's where I did some of the writing and report writing. And I was fortunate to be able to do that part-time. And then I got to a point where I thought, I really need to grow. I need to be challenged. I need like different types of projects. And it'd be nice to have something with benefits. And so, yeah, right. So, yeah, this job opened up and it was a new position. And I had been involved in the school system as a parent volunteer and was intimately familiar with the schools in the area. And it started out that I was doing, writing like literature reviews. We were doing a lot more disseminating what's the current best practices in education. And we did some annual reports at that time. But over the past 14 years, my role at least has shifted as the school system has grown, we've had a lot more requests for data analysis, data collection. So I've continued doing the surveys, but I'm doing more data analysis and data reporting. And we've been using Excel mostly. 2 years ago, we invested in an online reporting tool called Click, which is like Tableau, where we can build apps that any LCPS, well, depending on what the app is, LCPS staff members can access, and they can see just data for their school, or they can see it for the whole school district, depending on what the nature of the report is. So we've been learning coding in order to learn how to use that. And so we can do tables and visualizations, and it's a really powerful tool to use. So it's so even though I've been in the same position, the role and the duties have changed over the past 14 years.
So let's talk more about some of the projects you're working on recently, and in particular, the survey that was featured then in that news story and the news article. So give me some background information about the survey. How many people did you survey? I think it was a huge number from what I read, huge in my neck of the woods, pretty big. Who was surveyed? Is that a typical type of survey or project in your work? Give us all the background info.
Okay. We had about 2 weeks from the time that leadership said we'd like to do a survey of families and staff to see where their comfort level is with these 3 models that we've developed, and what they're concerned about, what their needs are, and so that was kind of the purpose of it. The whole, as we plan for returning to school, what do the stakeholders need? The families, the students, the staff. And they've been working on these 3 models that they were planning for, and they were involving students and parents and staff in developing those models, but they wanted to get kind of a broader feel for the community at large. So that was the purpose of the 2 surveys. We did one for parents and one for staff, and parents were also asked about, how did the spring online learning experience go for you? And then as we were looking ahead, which model are you most comfortable with? What do your students need? What about bus transportation? Would you be comfortable with your child on the bus if they were sitting a row apart? Do you have computer access for distance learning for your students if that's necessary? The staff asked similar things, like, how did distance learning go for you? Did you get the support and the resources that you needed in the spring? How comfortable are you with it, with being in a classroom where students are, this distant apart? Are you comfortable wearing, face coverings and taking precautions? And what are your areas of concern? And so we looked around at the surveys that other school districts were doing. We looked at Fairfax's for one, Philadelphia another was another big one. So we kind of combined questions from those 2 resources and then things that were specific to Loudoun County. Developed the survey pretty quickly. We got a Spanish translation done pretty quickly. And then it was our public information office emailed it out to parents and staff, and then they promoted it in social media. And we knew we were going to get a lot of interest in it because it's such a hot topic. We do a school climate survey every spring that for staff and parents, and the parent survey usually gets 11 or 12,000 responses, and this one we had 46,000.
Wow. 46. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And then about 6,000 teachers and school-based staff responded to that. Usually we only have a couple thousand.
Wow.
So yeah, it was huge. And we wanted, we gave the parents the option to do the survey once for every child that they had, because we knew they might have children with different needs. They might have one child using special education services. They might have a 3rd grader and a 9th grader who would have completely different needs. They might have one child who does well with online learning and one parent and one child who doesn't. So, so it was huge, yeah.
So you mentioned 3 models. I think I know what those are, but walk me through what each of those 3 is all about.
Yeah. So one would be 100% distance learning. Kids learning at home, and teachers do some synchronous, which means they would be online at the same time as the students.
Mm-hmm.
Some asynchronous, so the teacher would record some video and have activities that the students would do on their own. So that's 100% distance. And then there's 100% in person, which would be just like the regular school year, everybody in school at the same time. And then the third is a hybrid.
Okay.
So students, we'd have half the students in the school for 2 days a week, the other half in the school for the other 2 days a week. And then on the fifth day, everybody would be doing distance learning, but the asynchronous type. So the kids would log in, they would do activities, and on that fifth day, teachers could be using that time for planning for the next week, or any kind of special activities that they needed to do. So those were the three different models: 100% distance, 100% in person, and then the hybrid.
So you mentioned that you had about 2 weeks for this. Is that from when you were asked to work on the survey to when you had to have all the results completed?
Yes.
So you're designing the survey, looking at what other counties are doing, what similar surveys exist, figuring out how electronically to administer it, getting the word out on social media and other methods that you mentioned. Everybody's responding. You're getting in over 50,000 responses that, of course, come with tons of data cleaning. We all know data cleaning takes 99% of our time, it feels like, or at least for me. It's like I just want to make the graphs, but I still have to do all the visualizing. And then you're compiling the information, you're making the graphs. That's pretty quick. That's a pretty quick turnaround time.
Yes.
Were you just working 24 hours a day in that time? You only have 4 people in your office. What did that look like behind the scenes?
There were a couple of very late night, early mornings. The survey went out on a Thursday night, and I spent the entire weekend monitoring our email account and the response to the survey, just in case, I wanted to, if anything broke down, if people weren't able to get in, I wanted to be on top of things. So I spent the entire weekend monitoring progress. And then it closed so it went out on a Thursday night and closed on a Tuesday night. And we had to have the reports ready by Friday so that they could be uploaded into the school board document site in preparation for the school board meeting on Monday night. So in the meantime, we had developed kind of a template of how we knew we wanted the report to look. And, we did the introduction and everything. We did this in Google Docs. And then, so after this, the survey closed Tuesday night, and then on Wednesday, we did the whole data extract for the survey. And it was all hands on deck. We split up the responsibilities. So the data analyst did the data cleaning, and she created pivot tables in Excel that would go in the Google Doc, and the research supervisor wrote a couple of sentences for each one of analysis. The program analyst did the qualitative data, because we had a couple of open-ended questions in there. So he scanned through the whole thing, saw what the trends were, pulled out some illustrative quotes to add into the written report. And then I took the tables that the data analyst used and did a PowerPoint presentation with the graphs. And the PowerPoint presentation was the one that was actually going to be delivered during the school board meeting by our assistant superintendent for instruction. And then they also had the written reports, one for the staff and one for the student, to refer to for more details. So they had all the tables with the numbers to refer to. And with the graphs, that was that was interesting because I was trying to use all of my Dataviz best practices that I've been using, kind of uncluttering the graphs and using color coding, like one color for elementary schools, one for middle, one for high, and making colors darker and lighter, and trying to use those contrasts, and tried, with the titles of the slide, I tried to pull out what the main finding was, if there was something they should be looking for. So that was yeah, it was very quickly done, but we've been working towards this kind of fast response model. Like, when I first started there 14 years ago, we were doing the full dusty shelf reports. And over the past few years, we've realized that our decision makers need data to make policy and decisions within a few weeks. They don't have time to wait for a year-long in-depth program evaluation. So we've been kind of gearing up for kind of a fast response model for reporting anyway, but this was really fast.
Yes, this is very fast. And that's why I'm relieved that you mentioned that you were working over the weekend. I'm not a fan of working on the weekends. I have kids too. Like, I don't want people to work on the weekends, but I think it's important to be honest about all the hard work that does go into something that is a really quick turnaround time, so that if other people who are in a similar role as you are watching, they know it's not just them like hustling at their desk, typing as fast as they can, that is the reality that a lot of us are working in, right now because of COVID and everything changing so quickly. What I love about your reporting model too is you had something for every level of detail, like every type of audience, because you mentioned that you had the two 15-page reports for each of the surveys, which was, you said it was students weren't, sorry, parents and teachers.
Right.
Parents and teachers. So you have like, excuse me, while I make visuals with my hands, I'm thinking of you had those two 15-page, pretty detailed reports that were tables. So you've got all the data for the technical audiences. Like maybe I can see fellow school systems wanting that data, or somebody who just wants more details. Somebody like me would love pouring through something like that and seeing all the tables. But then you also produce the slideshow that somebody else would present, which is going to be geared towards really that key audience that you're trying to reach, the school decision makers, the policy makers, and parents who might attend and teachers who might attend. But then you also had a news story come out of it, which reaches an even broader audience. It's a slice of the data, but it's just so great that there's, something really detailed and really broad. And then of course, like the main product, the presentation in the middle. So let's talk a little bit more about the news story. Did you know that was going to happen? Were you just surprised like I was to see that happen? Give me the background on that.
I was very surprised. Someone on one of the face groups that I'm a member of, I think it was our community Facebook page, linked to the news story and said, hey, LCPS was on the news today and for the school board decision about going back to school in the fall. And I thought, oh, I wonder what they said. And I clicked on it and watched it, and I almost fell out of my chair, literally. When I saw they used the graphs from my presentation.
They were good ones. They were good graphs. So
I was really, and they enhanced them too. Like there was one where they circled one set of graphs that that they wanted to pull attention to. It was a good story. It was with the combination of showing the quantitative data that the school board looked at, and then they had some audio from the public comment portion of the meeting. And that they had, I think, almost 300 people sign up to deliver some kind of public comment during that period. Each person had 1 minute. Yeah, so there was a lot going on, but they pulled, but yeah, no, that was a complete surprise. I mean, I knew that people would be looking at the report, but I thought mainly like the school board and people who tuned in to watch the school board meeting. I thought they would see it, but I didn't realize that people would like take anything from it and use it in a different way.
Aren't you so relieved they didn't pick some horrible graph with like a pie chart with 20 slices and you're like, oh no, I know Anne said not to do that, but no, the graphs that were great. And like you mentioned, there were different columns of, was it elementary, middle, and high, I think were the three categories that you had color coded, of course, which you did on purpose. And they had, was it a red markup, maybe kind of the woman telling the story had kind of circled one that she was talking to. I thought that was great. And I loved how they did the mix of the quantitative results that you had and the qualitative. It was just such a good blend.
It was.
Yeah. I was really proud with how they did that because, we've all seen data portrayed well in the news and not so well. So I feel like this is a good example of how data can be used well. And I hope you feel really proud of the graphs you made, because I think that if your graphs hadn't been so clear, maybe they wouldn't have included them because maybe they wouldn't have been able to understand them enough to further explain them in the news story. But because you had something that was really intuitive and really easy to follow for them, it's like, what a great starting place for all of the reporters and people working in media. Is like, they don't have to go fish for data. They've just got it there ready to use for them. So good work, Vivian.
Oh, thank you. Of course, I looked at it and thought, well, if I knew they were going to use it, maybe I would have done something differently. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that, though. What types of reflections do you have on this process? Because like we've talked about, you had this really quick turnaround of just 2 weeks. And I know your office was working so hard during that 2 weeks, but of course, there's always something that we're like, oh, in hindsight, maybe we should have done that differently. Or if you knew they were going to be featured on the news, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I think overall we did well with the time that we had. I think we did the best we could with the time that we had. And the school board gave us some positive feedback. And I know it was memorable. I was in a store a couple days after the school board meeting, and I heard a couple of parents talking, and they mentioned one of the statistics from the report. So, I knew it was being used. I'm glad that we did this survey because we had in the comments, people mentioned, thanks for asking, basically. Thanks for asking our opinion. So I think overall, it was well received. Of course, there are things that I wished we could have done differently. I wished I would have had more time to test out the survey. Usually I like to do that to make sure, is this question worded clearly? Or is it being understood the way that we were trying to ask it? Mm-hmm. I would have liked to have shown the graphs to more people to make sure that they were understandable. It would have been nice to have the survey available in different formats, because even though we're a wealthy county overall, we do have pockets of people who are low income, and we've heard from some principals that they have a large portion of parents who don't have smartphones, who don't have computers. So I wondered, did they even hear about the survey? So just to be inclusive. But that, and there were some technical things like maybe the way that I brought the images into the PowerPoint slides just made the file really cumbersome and large to use. Mm. So that's one thing I want to look into. Are there different ways to do that? But I think that our team worked well together. The data analyst was relatively new. She just started with us like a week or two before this project even came up. So she was thrown into it. But I think we worked well as a team, and overall, I think we did well with the time that we had.
Well, fortunately, or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, this probably isn't going to be your last quick turnaround survey that you work on. So, that's the beauty of all of this, though, with data visualization, is we're always just trying to constantly improve. And I'm personally really proud of your work that you and your office did. I think it's amazing. And again, that's why I wanted to invite you to share more about the project today. What did Loudoun County Public Schools ultimately decide to do for school reopening? Because I know schools are opening fairly soon, in about, what, a month and a half or so? You had mentioned
Mhm.
right before we started recording in September. So what did they decide?
Yeah, they decided to go with the hybrid model, so have the students in school at a time. But parents could opt out of that model. They could do 100% distance learning if they weren't comfortable with their child going to school. And right now, there's a registration process going on where parents are supposed to log in and then let us know which one that they're going to go with, because there's a lot of planning that's going to have to go on for that. Figuring out. I think they're going to split it up alphabetically. Um, the students going in school, so that siblings would be going at the same time. Um, and but there's a lot of like bus transportation that has to be planned, and we're going to be using a new platform for instruction. So, and this will have a better online component to it, and we'll be able to collect better data for monitoring. So, whether the students who are logging in, if they're doing the activities, so we can identify if there's any students who are maybe having difficulty with that process. So that's going on right now, and they'll be planning for that over the next month. And yeah, school will start, I think, September 8th, so which is later than usual, but they wanted to allow teachers more time for training and planning.
So people can learn more in a couple different ways. So you had mentioned to me earlier that the two 15-page reports and the presentation slides are available on the school board site. Those are public, so we'll link to them below for anybody who wants to check those out. And we'll also link to the news story that has both an article and a short video clip that featured the quantitative data that Vivian and her team produced, and the qualitative data, the voices of people who spoke at the meeting. Vivian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, and I hope it was helpful.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. Good job.
Okay.
That was great. I'm gonna press stop.